back to the Self-Illumination Podcast. So stoked that you're here. Big welcome to Angel Quintana, my guest today. She's the founder of Sacred Anarchy, a spiritual lifestyle that teaches the alchemical path to sovereignty, hosting holistic healing as well, and also truly how to govern oneself. And needless to say, I'm a fan. She's also the creator of Holistic Fashionista, a publishing house dedicated to the creation of the new earth through her proprietary system of Sophia cosmology, which I highly recommend. She helps light workers step into leadership and be the change they wish to see in the world. And I'm so excited that you're here, Angel. I know we're going to have an amazing conversation today about congruence. And I'm so grateful that you made the time to be here.
I am honored. Let's talk congruency, man. My favorite topic.
I know. Well, you know what I want, because I like yourself. Like I do kind of like, we've talked about this. And for those of you listening, if you do not work with Angel, I'm telling you right now, just check out her stuff, because she will hook you up in a way that is congruent, is aligned, and will help facilitate you up leveling in ways you can't imagine. And I've been a client for, oh my God, so long.
Is it a decade now?
Like a decade? It's insane. I am so on this bandwagon, y'all. And, one of the things that I have really loved about being a client and watching you evolve is you are paving this path. And I have benefited from that, and what could have been a really hard times in my life, I've been able to kind of look at how you've navigated difficulty in your life. And I think before we even start talking about all that, congruency can bring to the table, is if you would mind just like giving a definition of congruency, like your idea of what that is.
As above, so below.
Amen.
Right? As above, so below. Everything that you're experiencing in your life is from a holographic experience. So if you want to see something different in your life, then you need to make sure that what's incongruent in your life that is preventing that from showing up. And that has everything to do with the subconscious mind, tapping into the higher self, but still honoring the lower self, but bringing those together in what we call illuminating Sophia's light.
Yeah. And I love how I have done that, like, and still continue to review the Sophia cosmology and use it daily. And this idea of bringing the lower self and the higher self together, and illuminating that Sophia light, there's not a lot of language out there, about it. It has all come through this concept of right-brained, left-brain, logical, creative. And so it's almost created this separation, or, what I would call, in my wordsmithery way, of this disillumination, where people are really, they're not hooking themselves up, so to speak, by connecting. And I'm really curious for yourself, like what really gave you that moment of like, I got to get congruent?
Well, actually, this whole process of the lower self that I teach in my process, I actually learned from a really ancient old astrology book, which I don't even remember the name right now, but it's an old book. And I remember seeing them talk about the lower self. I don't know if they were using that language actually, but they were talking about this trinity from both the higher and the lower. And that really resonated from me, from understanding, manifestation. I think at that point I was really like, how do I get the law of attraction to work? Or how, because I believed in all of that, but I wasn't really seeing the results in my life. And so the more that I went down the rabbit hole, and this has been, 30 years of studying astrology, studying the occult, and putting those pieces together, that took a long time. There wasn't like one manuscript or one book or one system that got me to understand, oh my gosh, I have been enslaved by this lower self and I didn't even know it. And so that's when I realized, okay, if I know now that I'm coming from, my primitive self, right? My emotions, my mind, my physical body, then how do I access the higher realm so that I can start to balance out? Like, I am in a physical body, but I've also got these higher faculties. And so that's where this concept of Sophia came to me, from learning the Gnostics, but I kind of have a different interpretation, slightly altered from that, around phantoms and really not identifying with the persona of you, which has to do with that lower self, like what you look like, even what your body is doing inside, all of those, like your diet, like all that stuff is lower self. Even though they might raise your vibration, there's a whole other realm. And so that's where I wanted to take a deeper dive into myself of being like, okay, well, I'm obviously stuck in the lower self. How do I access these higher faculties so that I can start to see why things aren't coming into fruition? And that's when this concept of congruency. So if you think about as above, so below, well, then there's obviously something that's happening up above that's affecting the below, and something the below that's affecting the above. And so I had to, start to dissect. I had to become a detective of like, well, let me look at my behaviors, because my behaviors show me what my thoughts were, and my thoughts showed me what my experience, my knowledge was. And so the more that I added knowledge, the more that I could discern that knowledge, process that knowledge, and then it would change my behavior. So it became this, what's called the trivium. The trivium is helping you to change your behaviors. So the more knowledge I took in, and this is where I think people stop. They stop at just accumulating knowledge. Like, well, I know what's going on in the world. I've accumulated all this knowledge. But now you've got to process the knowledge, and then you've got to change your behaviors. Otherwise, I have this saying, to know and not to be is truly not to know. You have to actually become that which you learn. And that's a process. And so once I got to the root of, my problem, which was the enslavement of the Babylonian money magic system, I was like, okay, I'm a workaholic. I value too much of the lower self or the primitive world. I need to access these higher realms. And so that's where knowledge became this generator of like, okay, let's go. And so I was just like, give me all the knowledge, and then let me process it, and then I'll start making those behavior changes, which then opened up the portals to these higher faculties.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you just said generator, because for those of you listening that don't know that I teach yoga and lots of other things, I'm a super fan of Kundalini yoga because it has like shifted my paradigms very rapidly, along with working with Angel. The two have just been like, that has been magical for me, that combination, because the principles of Kundalini yoga really talk about this idea of GOD as generating, organizing, and distributing. And so I love that you just said generating, right? Because if you're generating your awareness, then you can organize your energy and distribute it to manifest. So I think it's really cool, looking at this idea of holy shit, I'm just stuck in this one section of my being. How do I get both parts of me? Because I think so many of us, because of, I love your language around Babylonian money magic. And I'm so in alignment with that, because all of us have just been taught to just be these little mice in a maze that doesn't benefit the mice in the maze. There's really nothing in there for the people in the maze. It's all about who's controlling the puppet strings, right? And so as you start to really awaken and become more congruent, lighting up this Sophia light, illuminating yourself, truly self-initiation is what it is, right? It's this path of self-initiation. Then what happens is you naturally start kind of cleaning out some of the garbage that's been programmed in your mind. And I'm curious, like, what was that? Did you have like a single moment where you were like, oh shit, I'm onto something?
Oh gosh, there was probably many of those, but initially I started with life path astrology. I know you're a certified life path astrology.
I'm sold on that train. I am a life path astrologer. I believe in it.
that I feel like was kind of the beginning of like, okay, I'm not looking at the chart in the same way. And I had been studying astrology since I was 14 years old, but I just had this day where I was like, I feel like the 12th house is my Kismet client. And then I had to like test that, right? I had to go read charts this way to see if other people resonated the way I was resonating. And sure enough, people were like in tears, like, oh my gosh, you just told me things that I I can't believe that you would know. And it wasn't like a traditional like astrology rating. And so I think that made me realize that if I'm going to open up these portals, if I'm going to take my workaholism and I'm going to start chunking it down, I'm going to clean out those pipes, right? I
Mm-hmm.
need to figure out what was I doing incorrectly. And that had to do with what I call the Kismet client. And the Kismet client is the mirror. It's the reflection of the things that I have not completed yet in this cycle. And so as much as I'm serving the Kismet client, the service is tenfold, right? It's I'm generating as much energy as I'm actually giving back. So it's truly this two-way street. So I was able to see parts of myself that I had not healed. And so that became, oh my gosh, work became not work. It became, how much more could I learn about myself through my clients? And all my clients were the spiritual people. They were the Reiki healers and the yoga teachers and all these things. And I'm like, okay, like I feel like their essence was like rubbing off on me. And the more that I worked with those people, the more I was getting these downloads. And then, as synchronicities and things started happening. And so I really just attribute congruency. The first path to that is, if you're of service, whether you have a business or a movement yet, the people that you are serving, and this could be your children, this could be your friend group. I mean, it doesn't have to be a business, but they're mirroring back to you things that you need to work on, whether it's triggering to you, or maybe they've talked on a subject that you're not familiar with. Like, they're giving you feedback. And I was like taking in the feedback and running with it and really putting the puzzle pieces together for myself.
I think that's one of I love that you said feedback. I think that's one of the things that is so challenging for people in life on this, on that path of self-development, is sometimes they will butt up against something that they're like, "Oh, that doesn't feel so good." And they'll take it as a critique, or they don't want to confront. I think that's a word that kind of gets a bad rap in our culture, is confrontation, because confronting something also means you're standing in your power. To me, I think there's a point where confrontation, you can care enough, right? To quote you can care enough to stand in your power and know that it isn't about confrontation. It's about caring enough from a place of love and service. And I think that is such a potent thing, because when you even have to self-reflect, right? That's the part where I think a lot of people hang up. It's easier to keep plugging into the distractions. It's easier to keep plugging into the placebo effect of, oh, well, that makes me feel congruent, and then feeling not so great on the inside. And I think, one of the great gifts of life path astrology for me is much like what you said. It's like, when I work with people, seeing those things where I'm like, oh man, if they could do X, Y, and Z, their life would shift, but they have to want X, Y, and Z. I can't want it for them. So what is it in me that's, I refer to this sometimes as meta wanting, where I can't want enough for you. Which means at the end of the day, they might not be my Kismet client, right? Like, it might not be congruent. And I think for myself, that's something that I'm always coming back to in the layers of my offerings, in the layers of my teachings, is this something that is truly that I'm congruent? And when I'm not, I kind of have to hit the pause button and be like, okay, let me clean that up so that I can authentically step back in and maintain integrity and what I believe is like proper care, like true heart space based service. So I love that you said that, because it's heart based service doesn't come from a place of misalignment.
Yeah.
And it's been so inspiring, and just so, for lack of a better word, so damn cool to watch you evolve and grow and navigate these life changes, and then to be a client as well, right? As I've evolved and grown and navigated my own life changes. And I think one of the things that we both talk about from a different way of looking at things is this idea of the conscious and the subconscious mind. And so one of the things I'd love for you to tell listeners, even if it's one of like your products you can tell them to go to, because you have so many awesome offerings, is how can they get started on just understanding the conscious and the subconscious mind?
Well, okay. So the first thing is the subconscious mind is feminine and the conscious mind is masculine. So I'm just going to give a visual, since I know I'm a very much a visual learner.
And I love visuals, so bring it.
Okay, so this is the card that I feel like everybody who's listening, if they care to learn more, is meditate on this card. It's the Lover's card in the tarot. And basically, this is the subconscious mind, the conscious mind, and then the super conscious or the collective unconscious mind. And so, if we know that the subconscious is feminine, then we know that there's chaos there. And if we know that the conscious mind is masculine, then we know that there is order there. So there's always a pole, right? Law of polarity. And so if we're going to get started, I think the thing that people don't do is deal with the subconscious, which is the chaos or the negative charge or the darkness. So I often call this the void. I have a class called the void, but if we deal with the subconscious, if we are willing to get a little messy, right? Chaos is a little messy, but the benefits that come from that are creativity, innovation. You start to see yourself for who you really are, and you get to clean up all the things that are preventing you from moving forward. If we only stay in that masculine mind of like, this is all I got to do today, this is my list, I'll check it off, I'm going to stay very orderly, I'm going to stay in a routine, that's that left brain stuff, that's just going to get you to be obsessed with the lower self. You're going to become obsessed with just the primitive world. But if we deal with the subconscious world, the world that deals in symbols, that deals in sigils, then we start to learn a new language, and it's a language within yourself. So like, whether you see synchronicities or you've seen symbols that you think are demonic or whatever, as you start to see that your subconscious mind has a language that it is speaking through. And you can change that language. You can change what, demons mean to you. You can change what feels scary, like snakes or whatever. You can change those things. But it's our fears in that subconscious dark pool, so to speak, that are going to be, I think, our greatest teachers. So I have two classes. One is called Fear Blocks Magic, and another one is called The Void. If you want to be really advanced in your beginning journey, I would say the Lilith workshop is really going to get you to see the shadowy subconscious programming that is preventing you from being congruent with what you actually desire in your life.
I love that, you brought up shadows, because I think that's something that there's a lot of language out there around shadow work. But when I look into it, a lot of it is pretty superficial. It's just like, oh, shadow work is this. And yes, it's interesting. And when I say superficial, I want to be really clear for the listeners that what I'm talking about is that shadow work is not superficial. The language around shadow work is a little superficial out there because it taps right back into the right brain, or back into the left brain stuff around like, oh, it's Carl. Yeah. Like it gets all these identifiers, and what I love about, I've done both of those classes. And what I love about them is that you have this way of languaging it where it is this flow, it's this ebb and flow, right? And if you understand like the cycle of your thoughts or the pattern or the things you think about the most, then you can really start looking at what's stored in this data bank of your subconscious mind. And when you start looking at what's stored in the data bank of your subconscious mind, you're going to start seeing what you think about the most. And when you start seeing what you think about the most, you're going to start being able to correlate why you feel the way you feel at certain times. Like it's magic. It really is. And that's the thing that I think so many of us have forgotten, is that we are the magic.
Totally.
It's not outside of us.
I had this, still to this day, I would say I have this, not obsession, but I really like sappy music. I like listening to sad songs. There's just something about it. But I had to be careful, because when I started to do this shadowy work, right, the subconscious mind work, I realized that it was keeping me in a cycle of repeating sadness, grief, all the crap that I'd been into my life. It almost became a friend, right? But it was an unhealthy, toxic friend of just constantly making myself sad. And so I have a new little magic spell for myself, where now, instead of giving up all of that music, I don't listen to it as often, but I do listen to it quite a bit. So now when I listen to the lyrics, when it's like, if it's a, like, say it's a breakup song, or you're just missing somebody or whatever, instead of thinking about the person I'm missing, I say, I think of it as my ego. So it's like, you were such a great friend. It's sorry you're gone. Or like, I start to change the meaning. Instead of being the person, I put my ego there, or I put my fear, or I change the meaning. And that's what I mean. You are the one in control of your life. Your language is, you're making it up. It's not that this thing means this and that means that. No, you've given those things meanings, or you've been programmed to think that is what it means. It doesn't have to mean that.
I love that, because, that really, I think for people who are listening to this that maybe have never thought about like looking into those more chaotic aspects of themselves, right? Maybe it's the life artist in me, but when I hear chaos, I'm like, I'm ready to get my hands dirty, like I don't mind it so much. But I also was married many years to an artist. So a little chaos is like a fun time. It's when it's inside and it never sees the light of day. It's when it's constantly driving your reality, and you're in your conscious mind going, what the hell is going on? Why isn't my life the way I want it to be? And it's because you haven't quite made that connection, right? That's my belief, is that you haven't made that connection, that you have this whole, layer of subtext that's writing your story. And being able to get in there and go, is that mine, or is that someone else's? And if it's mine, do I actually still want to carry that forward? Because if not, you can change the story, just like you're saying with the songs, right? You can say, oh, later ego, we have this great word for it in Sanskrit, and it's ahamkara. And what I love about this is when you really start studying your philosophy, aham means I am. Kara is the lower self. So you get to decide, how are you going to navigate your reality? Are you going to I am and be the ego? Or are you going to I am and identify with your higher self and bring that down into your manifest world? Right. And I think that's the epitome of what you're talking about with igniting your Sophia light, like bringing these two aspects of yourself into harmony so that you create this bridge to operate from your soul.
Absolutely. Like my definition of magic with a K, is magic is using your will, your spiritual will, to turn I into me. And that I is your idea of what you want, right? Your higher self has this image of what it is that you want, and then you're going to turn it into me, meaning I'm here right now. So how do I pull what's up here of what I say I am successful, I am in love, I am in a harmonious relationship, whatever it is, and you're going to pull it down into me. So, but you're using your spiritual will. That's the art of magic in my definition, is really getting clear about what it is that you want. And then we've got to transmute it. We've got to turn it into gold. But the way that we do that is not through the lower self. It's through spiritual will, which is part of the higher faculties, right? The higher faculties is the higher mind, the spiritual will, and the intuition. And the higher mind, the way I visualize the higher mind is like a portal. And if it's clogged up, like it's a clogged drain, you need the Drano or whatever, like you have to break on through, because even if it's tight, it's like the information is not going to flow really naturally through. It's almost like having like a clogged artery, right? You like have a heart attack because it's clogged. It's not having that chi run through it. So what we want to do is, when we become congruent, we start to clean out that higher mind portal, and the higher mind allows you to access the intuition. And then the intuition starts to open up all of these different portals within you that give you access to all different kinds of information. And that strengthens the will. And the will is how we use magic.
And I love that you just explained that, because I know that I am doing some of the classes with you. So we've had that conversation, but I think it's something that when people hear it, especially in this podcast, it helps them understand a little bit more that being me isn't a negative thing, right? Like bringing the I am into me is you really lighting yourself up and living your best life. And I think a lot of times when all of us, I was just writing about this earlier in my self-illumination book, that all of us have been programmed to believe that if it is not a certain way, then it's not perfect. There's that illusion word, right? And then you will never be good enough because you are by proxy identified with the production of results. And what starts to happen, I think, when you really can understand that, when you understand your truth and who you really are, and you manifest and bring that higher self down and you coalesce it with the ego, what starts to happen is you realize that you are so unique and so special, and your alchemical process will be different than someone else's, and different because your programming is different. What you're here to offer is different. Your responsibilities to share with humanity are unique to you. And I think that for me, that's like by far one of the most potent things about congruency, is because as you become more congruent, I love how you did this wave like pattern with your hand, right? Because as you become more congruent, it's not this like linear thing. It's this flow. You said it so beautifully, right? It's where the hose of your intuition becomes unpinched by your egoic mind, right? And then you're able to really start not only getting all these downloads, but trusting yourself. Would you say that's been something you've really noticed on your path with congruency, is that you trust yourself?
Well, I know myself. So
Yeah.
it's like, once you know, it's not even believing, it's not even hoping or praying that whatever, it's, I know that magic works because I am the creator of my reality. I am magic. I have to learn how to use my own magic. And that is an individual process. These are just pillars, if you will, so that we can understand the process of what's called creating the rainbow bridge. You're creating the rainbow bridge between the lower and the higher self. And when you do that, you have this expansiveness around your awareness of what life is. You start to just do life differently. You start, the things you once valued, you realize those were all primitive desires. And when you create that rainbow bridge, you have different aspirations. You start to realize that the more that I evolve, that is a currency, that is a wealth of information and consciousness that I get to take with me. So it's really just a very profound process to get to this place where everything, even when shit hits the fan, that it is part of your magical process. And when you see that nothing is happening to you, it is happening for you. I know that is an overplayed saying, but there's so much truth to that. When you see that it's happening for you, it gives you a key. So think about your lowest moment. Even if somebody's in it right now, you're being offered a key. And if you just endure that for a moment, it'll open a door and it'll open it, and you'll be able to see all this new information that you couldn't see before. So if we get out of the cycle of staying in that depressed state or in that anxiety or that grief or that anger or whatever it is, those things are fine. That's part of the human experience to have that. But it's how long are you going to stay there? Because if you stay there, that's your demons. Those are your shadow guides saying, look, we're going to make you miserable until you snap out of it. So you keep on this path of change, of keep that cycle of those thoughts going in your head, and we're going to make you miserable. But it's like this tough love kind of relationship that you're having with your guides, right? Your shadow guides, your spirit guides, whatever, until you actually awaken to a new possibility, a new way of living.
A new knowing, right? Your true knowing, I think, is maybe how I would even think of that for myself. Man, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much. And I would love, love, love for you to tell everyone how they can get in touch with you. Tell them about all your awesomeness. Where do they need to go first?
Well, I will mention that I love to make elixirs. I have healed myself of so many chronic ailments from my higher self not being integrated. So definitely check out the Sacred Anarchy Temple. I have tons of healing elixirs there. Otherwise, you can just learn more at sacredanarchy.org. And just start there. You might even just try checking out my YouTube channel or my Instagram. But honestly, I think just starting with the Great Rebirth series, which is a very introductory membership that really gives you the backstory of where our programming likely comes from, so that you can start looking at those scary things and moving through them, because they're not scary. That's just our perception of them.
Yeah, I love the Great Rebirth series. So definitely, if you are listening to this and you are not familiar with Sacred Anarchy, you're not familiar with Angel, sign up for that because it's amazing. It's like my total Netflix. I
Girl.
absolutely love it. Well, thank you so much, Angel, for being here. You are such a gift to humanity. I'm so stoked to be a part of your path and you a part of my path. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And as always, stay illuminated, and I'll see you back here soon.
Bye, everyone.